Good morning, everyone. Well, if you can believe it, in a happy accident, I discovered a time machine, and I went back in time, and here I am in ancient Egypt. If you can believe that, the weather's beautiful, a little breezy, and I'm out in front of the Temple of Sobek, which is one of those Egyptian gods that you can look up. Well, let's look at our story. I think it's a perfect spot, maybe, to read a little bit about our story, Mara, daughter of the Nile. Um, we we had a very telling conversation in the Inn of the Falcon, where it looks like Sheftu has strong feelings for Mara, but can't admit that and can't trust her. And Mara has strong feelings for him, and she can't trust him either because remember, she is a slave and willing to do anything just for the price of freedom. And he is a noble lord who would do anything to get Thutmose on the throne. So they're in a tough situation to try to explain. And not to mention that he is one of the wealthiest nobles in all of Egypt, and she is but a slave. And that's just not something that this society does. All right. So we're going to move on a little bit. And she finally told them the message. The message from Thutmose to Sheftu was that Sheftu has to go into a tomb, a royal tomb, and steal the treasure, which is the worst crime, the foulest crime that a human can commit. And they're gonna do that. All right, so here we go. Chapter, or at least he's going to do that. At least he says he's going to do that. Chapter 14, Shadow of the Dead. Now, it's going to be a while before he goes into the tomb, but we'll read the story up until then. There was nothing of the simple scribe about Lord Sheftu as he sat at breakfast next morning on the roof loggia of the villa on his street of sycamores in western Thebes. He was clad in a dressing gown of royal linen girdled with scarlet leather, and beside his chair was a table of carved Lebanon cedar, bearing fruit, bread, cheese, and a lily entwined flagon of milk. A Cushite slave hovered at the background. Beyond the balustrade stretched the ample groves, gardens, and stables of Sheftu's town estate. They were extensive, but not so extensive as his ancestral holdings downriver, where acre upon acre of farmland, vineyards, pastures, orchards, grain fields poured their riches every year into his storerooms and purse. It was a monthly accounting of those riches that was being read to him now by the old man in an elaborate wig who stood beside the balustrade. Iranamon, major domo of the entire domain, since long before the death of Sheftu's father, Menkau. From your lordship's dairies near the village of Nekeb, 30 pounds of cheese, both white and yellow, and 20 beef for slaughter. Iranamon's voice was like the rustling of a dried palm frond. In addition, 100 skins of wine have been brought upriver on your lordship's barge, hour of sunset, to be stored in your lordship's warehouses in the city of Thebes. But his lordship was not thinking of beef or wineskins, nor was he showing much appetite for the array of dainties on the golden platter beside him. While his long fingers crumbled the bread and toyed absently with the fruit, his mind was far away in the desolate wastes of the valley of the tombs of the kings. In one of the barren gullies of that wilderness was a certain pile of red granite boulders. It looked the same as the other piles tumbled here and there through the valley, as if at the whim of a destructive giant. But to Sheftu, it was not the same. Far below it, in vast and silent chambers hollowed out of the living rock, slept the one whose peace he must destroy, whose wealth he must steal, whose caw he must impoverish. The dread of it had lain like a stone on his mind since he had dragged that message out of a reluctant Mara. Though he had not let her see it. He hated and feared his task with all his heart. But it was not the crime she thought it, nor was it certain the guardian Kefs would rend his soul or even strike him blind. For there was one thing Mara had not known when she stormed and pled with him, and that was the identity of the royal slumberer. He was Thutmose I, father of the king and of Hatshepsut. In life, his arrogant daughter had robbed him of his throne when he was ill and feeble. Would he not willingly be robbed once more in death if his gold could overthrow her? The prince had vowed he would, and Sheftu believed. He had to believe, because otherwise. Sheftu shook away that otherwise, along with the memory of Mara's predictions as she clung to him in fear. Whatever the Kefs might do, he had no choice but to descend into the tomb and come out laden. This was the last great gamble he and Thutmose had agreed on long ago, and the time had come to try it. Everything else that could be done was done. Therefore, if the grain remained in the warehouses until such time as I fear your lordship is not listening. Sheftu pulled his attention back to old Eronamon's reproachful voice. Tell me the last again, please. According to the calculations of our river experts who are never wrong, repeated Aranamon patiently, this year's inundation will be a small one, resulting in poor crops and a scarcity of grain in the months to come before Mother Nile again sends her gift to Egypt. Therefore, if a portion of your lordship's wheat still in the warehouse were to remain there, it would command a far greater price next summer in the time of hunger. I understand. Save it by all means against the time of hunger, but do not raise the price, Eronomon. The people must eat, whether they can pay or not. That's good. So he cares about the regular people who need to buy the wheat, as your lordship wishes. Eronomon cleared his throat and rustled the papyrus. However, we sell much grain to the agents of Her Majesty for the palace kitchens. Sheftu shot a glance at the blandly innocent old face and hid a smile. Charge what the buyer can pay. I leave it to your discretion. So he's saying, when we're in the time of hunger and the palace, meaning Hatshepsut, needs grain, needs wheat, sell it as high as you want, because they can pay. But to regular people in Egypt, don't raise the price. The old servant bowed and went on with his list without further comment. But Sheftu knew that a fresh stream of gold from Hatshepsut's treasuries would soon be pouring into his coffers, unless indeed the treasuries belonged to Thutmose by next summer. He felt a tremor of emotion at the thought. After 6 long years, it was hard to believe that the end of all this was approaching. They've been planning this for 6 years, working on this. Yet the plans he and Thutmose had made so long ago were almost complete. The work almost finished. Hatshepsut's elaborate structure of power was now like a house set upon columns of sand. Enlisting Khopra to gain control of the army had further weakened the foundations. There remained only a few lords still stubbornly loyal to the queen, out of fear for their own fortunes and futures. These must be won over by persuasion and by gold, the greatest persuader of them all. Sheftu smiled grimly, tossing bread to the pigeons strutting along the balustrade. His regard for his fellow man was not what it had been 6 years ago. He no longer believed, even in his heart, that there lived man or woman gold could not buy. Can you remember that? So you had Mara believing that, look after yourself because nobody else would. And now he believes anyone can be bought for a price. Every person, every man and every woman has their price to be bought. Remember this. Only their prices differed. These last cautious ones would cost a pharaoh's fortune, and a pharaoh must supply it. He who slept beneath that pile of boulders in the valley of the tombs of the kings. If you're wondering, you know that pyramids are tombs of pharaohs. Well, they were kind of like a marker for tomb robbers. Like here's great treasure in this if you can figure out how to get in. And so they were robbed. So then they started burying pharaohs in the Valley of Kings, which didn't. It just looked like a plain old valley. It didn't have anything special to mark it, but it was still well guarded. His thoughts had come full circle for the 20th time that morning. Sheftu left his chair abruptly, and the pigeons scattered with a drumming of wings. Iranamon stopped reading, then began to roll up his papyrus. My lord wearies of business, he said tactfully. Indeed, the morning is too fine for it. When I was your age, shall I have the boat and the throw sticks ready to divert you? Nay, old friend, I've no time for hunting, but I pray you, let us finish these accounts another time. I must drive to the temple within the hour. Go below and tell the barber to make ready for me. As the old man turned toward the stairs, Sheftu laid an apologetic hand on his shoulder. Forgive my inattention, faithful one. I have much on my mind. Iranamon's face lighted hopefully. Indeed? Can it be that my lord has perhaps met some young lady? Young lady? With some difficulty, Sheftu achieved a careless smile. Patience, Iranamon. Someday, I promise thee, my mother's long empty place at table will be filled. But at present, get thee gone now, young lady. Turning irritably as the majordomo hobbled down the stairs, Sheftu signaled the slave to pour him a cup of milk. But even the lotus twined about the flagon brought to mind two mocking eyes, blue as enamel under slanted brows. Why in Ammon's name must he think so continually of that waif? He's thinking of Mara, and it's driving him nuts. Like, why am I thinking about her? I can't think about her. I got more important things to do. Plus, she's just a slave. For a waif, she was. Remember the marketplace at Menfi? Remember her walking on the boat, that smudge on her face and wild defiance in her pose? Yet a dozen times a day he found himself thinking of the fluid way she walked, dwelling fascinated on some elusive curve of her cheek or her throat, becoming preoccupied with the shape of her mouth. Aye, and remembering far too vividly the yielding warmth of her in his arms. Oh, Cyrus! He had all but made love to her last night in the tavern courtyard, all but forgotten she was an unprincipled little vagabond, bound to him only by a threat and a bribe. He must not forget. The maid could worm secrets from the Sphinx himself. His lordship set the cup down hard and descended the stairs. The devil. He had talked too much last night. Why not admit it? He, Sheftu, the discreet. She knew far more than he had ever intended her to know. Yet he'd had to fight the urge to keep talking. Have you not learned, he asked himself caustically, not to trust every maid who weeps on your shoulder? He walked down the corridor and through a richly furnished sitting room, as blind to their sunny familiar comfort as he was deaf to the greetings of a couple of the house slaves who wished him good morning as he passed. How easy it would have been there in the moonlight to throw away all caution, to hold her tight in his arms and whisper that she must not fear. No kefs would harm one who came only to carry the dead king's gifts to his living son, to tell her even the name of the royal slumberer and the place where he lay. Sheftu went cold at the thought. Had the maid bewitched him? That he would court destruction merely to dry her tears? He must come to his senses. He was acting as witless as that young and handsome young sentry of hers. But I fear I'm misunderstood. Does my lordship wish me to return later? Sheftu swung around. He was standing in the middle of his own apartments, but had no more recollection of arriving there than he had of the presence of the barber, though the fellow must have spoken before. He collected his wits with some difficulty, cursing Mara and his own befuddled senses. Nay, I want you now, Thoth, he muttered, stripping off his dressing gown. Prepare your razors at once. I'm in haste. The feel of the cooling salves and the razor sliding over his chin restored a sense of normality to the day, and he was grateful for the barber's silence, which enabled him to compose himself. As the fragrance of sandalwood from the last lotion rose on the air, Sheftu stood up, running a hand over his jaw. You are expert as ever, Thoth. Send my dresser in at once, and tell one of the grooms to harness Ebony and Wind of Swiftness to my lightest chariots. Those are horses' names. 10 minutes later, Lord Sheftu spun out of the courtyard and down the street of sycamores toward the river. Plumes tossed above his horses' sleek black heads. The sunlight flashed from his gold collar and from 1,000 bits of colored glass set into the spokes of his chariot wheels. Driving off the ferry into the crowded streets of eastern Thebes, he flung handfuls of copper to the expectant throngs of waterfront urchins, meaning the little kids that are out there, then turned into the avenue of sphinxes, which bisected the city and brought him straight through the tall bronze gates to the temple of Ammon. He stepped down, looking for someone to hold the horses. The huge courtyard swarmed with beggars, hurrying priests and white-clad Thebans, buying frankincense and temple offerings from the hawkers whose booths lined the walls. Sacrificial fowls squawked and fluttered in their cages. Lambs bleated plaintively. The smell of dust animals and sacred unguents mingled with the fragrance of a mass of fresh lilies on a flower seller's stall. Hi, rejoice, master! An old peddler had spotted him, set down his tray of consecrated bread, and hurried forward to catch the horses' reins. Tossing him a few debens, Sheftu made his way through the crowd and into the vast columned corridors of the temple proper. He found the priest he sought in a tiny anteroom off the shrine of Hathor. Djet was a calm, portly man with a face like a moon, wearing the leopard skin of the Sem rank over his snowy white linen robes. He was tying up onions into the hollow circular bunches proper for the offering table, but at sight of Sheftu he paused. Your lordship, rejoice. He came forward at once, beckoning a subordinate to take over his task. There is some matter in which I may serve you? Aye, it concerns the mortuary shrine of my father's tomb. I wish to increase the number of loaves and honey jars left for his caw each month. And in addition, this isn't what that's just code. He's just saying that so nobody knows that they're going to meet in secret. 1,000 pardons, my lord. Pray, come into more comfortable quarters that I may offer you refreshment. My private chamber will serve. Sheftu followed the solid, stately figure out of the anteroom and down a hall lined with columns so massive they made even Djet seem fragile as a splinter. Once the door of the little room had closed firmly behind them, the priest's impassive manner vanished. Is it the signal? Shall I order thee? Nay, my friend, the time is not yet. Indeed, the time will never be unless you and I can perform one last impossibility. Sheftu sighed, the heaviness of his dread settling over him again. Sit you down, Djet. I will tell you what we must do. The priest's round face grew graver and graver as he listened. When Sheftu had finished, the little room was silent. Then Djet rose ponderously and walked to the table, where he stood staring down at a pile of scrolls. You have a plan, he muttered. Aye. We will need 2 diggers, men we can trust to be silent. Asher, remember, he was the guy who runs the big guy with the hoop earrings that runs the Inn of the Falcon. He was the husband of Miftaya, the little woman that was Sheftu's nursemaid. Asher can find them. And to ensure their silence after the task is done, I will send them to my farthest estate to live in luxury and solitude until it is safe to loose them. I know a river captain, Nakonk, who will arrange all that. As for your part, you must obtain the royal seal. Djet swung around, eyes bulging. But I cannot do that. Only the high priest of the city of the dead. I know, but you must accomplish it somehow. Listen. Djet listened. His expression changed slowly. He moved back to his chair and sank into it, his face intent, his voice low as he put a question or two. At last he nodded. I think it can be done. Unless the guards at the valley. He chewed his lip a moment, then shrugged heavily. Aye, the plan is shot through with danger, but what is not these days? Better we die, my lord, than Egypt. He rose, touching forehead and chest. I will do my best and send word. May the gods be with us. Better we die than Egypt, repeated Sheftu to himself as he walked slowly back down the corridor. His eyes moved to the columns rising close set and massive on either side, stretching up and up until their carvings were lost in the dim reaches far above him. Old beyond memory they were, like Egypt itself, and they would stand unchanged 1,000 years more. Aye, and so would Egypt, no matter who had to die. One death alone would be enough, thought Sheftu grimly, that of a bejeweled and willful queen. He turned a corner and strode along a passage, neither noticing nor caring where it led. A few moments later, roused by the faint, irregular beating of hammers, he stopped and looked around him. Scowling, he realized he had strayed into the north wing. Not since last summer had he come to this place, and he had sworn he never would again. Slowly he pivoted to his left. There, only a few paces distant, was the entrance to the hall the first Thutmose had built as his kingly gift to the god. Remember, they're in the temple of Ammon, so it's his gift. Kind of like the temple behind me. This is the temple of Sobek. The temple of Ammon, each pharaoh would present a gift. Okay, so I'm going to die, and here's my gift to that temple. So this was his, but of course, wait till you find out what Hatshepsut did. The first Thutmose had built as his kingly gift to the god. Sheftu walked toward it, his face set, the tap-tap of goldsmiths' hammers growing louder in his ears. At the tall doorway, he stopped, looking into a huge room flooded with sunshine. There, in the middle of the roofless hall, stood the queen's new obelisks. There are no obelisks here, really. Well, we'll talk about them. If you've ever seen the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., that's an obelisk. All right, so let's keep going. New obelisk. They were no nightmare then, but 700 tons of solid reality, monstrous needles of stone, 97 feet tall, soaring straight up into the brilliant sky. Sheftu's gaze traveled their length, part of which was at the moment obscured by scaffolding upon which gold workers swarmed. Well, he remembered the day last summer those shafts came floating down the river from the quarries on a flotilla of linked barges that seemed to stretch back to Nubia. No man had ever seen their like, for they had been cut from single blocks of granite, without seam or joint. And because the queen was impatient, in only 7 months' time, there was an inscription on them swearing to it. How in Ammon's name had mortal hands accomplished it? It was all but impossible. So was raising the obelisks here within the temple itself. But here Hatshepsut wanted them, and here they stood, though it had been necessary to tear out many of her father's beautiful cedar columns and the whole roof of the hall to make room for them. So she kind of destroyed her father's gift to the temple in order to create her own. Bitterly, Sheftu stared at the wreckage, remembering the crack of the lash and the ant-like swarm of men straining on ropes, dropping, dying, being trampled by their fellows as with a shuddering slow movement the great shafts rose into place. Monuments to Hatshepsut's pride and malice. The only reason they're up is so Hatshepsut can feel like she's grand, great, wonderful, and all everything. And a lot of people, had to struggle, had to die, and not to mention how much did it cost. And where did they get the money from? Oh, taxes, taxing the regular Egyptians. And now Sheftu's eyes moved to the scaffolding, through which a growing surface of pale yellow glittered in the sun. Furiously, he turned and strode back toward the courtyard. The faint tapping of the goldsmith's hammers following him. Through the sound, he could hear again Hatshepsut's voice. My majesty is not pleased. The obelisks are mere dull stone, and so unworthy the daughter of the sun. I desire that they reflect Ra's beams from every surface. They shall be cased in electrum. Remember, electrum was gold and silver mixed. She's encasing these gigantic obelisks in electrum. They're going to be encased. There's going to be like surface. That's crazy. Extravagance upon extravagance, until the very gods must be outraged. She would bring ruin upon the black land. The temple's dim quiet ended abruptly as Sheftu stepped into the noise and dust and mingled odors of the outer courtyard. It was like plunging into another element, and the shock steadied him and dissipated his wrath. Fool, anger gets you nowhere, he told himself as he gathered his horse's scarlet reins and popped the whip over their flanks. Let her have her obelisks. She will soon have nothing else. As for the task ahead, think no more of it now. Djet will arrange all. You have nothing to do but wait. All right, next chapter is chapter 15, The Signal. So that chapter we just had was just to show that Sheftu is definitely thinking about Mara. He definitely shouldn't be. He's driving himself crazy. And he it shows that he's planning with Djet, the other man we met, the other character we met today. And they have to go and get 2 diggers to dig up the tomb of Thutmose I and steal the treasure, steal as much treasure as they possibly can bring without getting caught and without, committing some crime against the gods that will destroy them. And we see that he further his anger towards Hatshepsut because she is spending Egypt's money on monuments only to make her appear grander and greater in the eyes of the world. Okay, so anyway, you guys have a great day. We will see you tomorrow. Hopefully my flux capacitor still works so I can get back to our time. And then, I'll try again and hopefully it works well. So if you don't see me tomorrow in class, it's because I'm stuck out here in 1000 BC. Okay, take care, guys. Bye-bye.